The silence in the house was a living thing. For 3 years it had been Alex's constant companion, a heavy blanket woven from memories of his late wife, Sarah. It muffled the sounds of the outside world, preserving the space as a shrine to a life that had ended too soon. He moved through the rooms like a ghost, his footsteps tracing paths they had once walked together. The world had moved on, but Alex remained anchored to the day he lost her. That was why Chloe's visit felt like a stone tossed into a still pond. Sarah's best friend stood on his doorstep, her expression a mixture of sorrow and nervous resolve. She had been a sporadic but consistent presence in his life since the funeral, a shared link to the woman they both adored. But today was different. There was an urgency in her eyes that set him on edge. "I have something for you, Alex," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She pressed a thick, cream-colored envelope into his hand. It was heavy, sealed with a wax stamp bearing an unfamiliar crest. Sarah's handwriting, elegant and unmistakable, was on the front. It simply said, "For Alex." "She made me promise," Chloe explained, her gaze fixed on the letter. "She said I had to wait. 3 years to the day, not a moment sooner. She said you wouldn't be ready until now." Alex stared at the envelope. A letter from the grave. A final word he never expected to receive. The very idea sent a tremor through the quiet grief he had so carefully curated. He thanked Chloe, his own voice sounding distant and hollow, and closed the door. The silence he returned to was no longer placid. It was now charged with a dreadful, thrilling static. He placed the letter on the mantelpiece beneath a smiling photograph of Sarah, and for a long time he just watched it, too afraid to learn what final secret it held. His life with Sarah had been a quiet rebellion against her family's world. The Vances were old money, a dynasty built on shrewd investments and social maneuvering. Her mother, Eleanor, was the family's matriarch, a woman whose posture was as rigid as her worldview. Her brother, Marcus, was a slick, polished product of that world, a man who wore his entitlement like a tailored suit. They had never approved of Alex. He was a librarian, a man of books and quiet contemplation, not of stock portfolios and hostile takeovers. To them he was a bewildering disappointment, the man for whom Sarah had inexplicably thrown away a future of wealth and status. While Sarah was alive, their disapproval was a constant low hum of condescension, veiled insults at family dinners, and patronizing questions about his little job. After she was gone, the hum became a roar. They treated him not as a grieving widower, but as a squatter in their daughter's life. They saw her death as an opportunity to erase what they considered her greatest mistake. Him. The annual memorial dinner, an event Eleanor orchestrated with grim theatricality, was the primary stage for this cruelty. The most recent dinner, just a week before Chloe's visit, had been the worst. It was held at the Vance mansion, a cold, cavernous place that always made Alex feel small and out of place. Eleanor had cornered him by the fireplace, her eyes sweeping over his simple suit with undisguised contempt. "It's been 3 years, Alex," she had said, her voice cutting through the hushed atmosphere like a blade. 3 years you've been living in Sarah's house. Don't you think it's time you moved on? Found a place more suited to your means?" Marcus had joined them, a smirk playing on his lips. "What my mother is trying to say is we're prepared to be generous. We'll give you $50,000 to vacate the property. A fresh start. It's more than you deserve, frankly." The offer was a calculated insult. The house, a charming bungalow in a quiet neighborhood, was worth 10 times that. But it wasn't about the money. It was about power. It was about scrubbing him from the narrative of Sarah's life. Alex had simply stared at them, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. "This was our home," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Eleanor let out a short, cruel laugh. "It was her house, Alex, a house our family's money paid for. You were just a guest, and your stay is over." She had a cheque already written out in her hand. She tried to press it into his. He refused to take it. The scene was brief, but its humiliation was deep and lasting. He was nothing to them, less than nothing. Now the letter sat on the mantelpiece, a silent counterpoint to their cruelty. What could Sarah have possibly needed to say that required a 3-year delay? Was it a confession, an apology, a simple goodbye? His mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. He knew that opening it would change everything. He just didn't know if he was strong enough to face it. For 2 days, the letter remained untouched. Alex circled it, his life shrinking to the space between the front door and the fireplace. He would pick it up, feel its weight, and put it back down. The seals seemed to mock him, a final barrier between the life he knew and the one that lay in wait. The house felt different now, charged with her presence in a way it hadn't been since her death. It was as if her ghost was waiting, holding its breath alongside him. He remembered their life together, the small moments of defiance against her family. Sarah had never cared for the Vance fortune. She found their galas suffocating, their obsession with appearances soul-crushing. With him, she had built a sanctuary of simplicity. They read books, tended their small garden, and took long walks. She had seemed so free, so happy to be away from the gilded cage of her upbringing, or so he had thought. Had it all been a lie? Was this letter a final, devastating revelation that she had regretted her choice? The fear was a cold knot in his stomach. The Vances had always insisted he was holding her back, that he had diminished her. What if, in the end, they were right? On the 3rd day, a formal-looking envelope arrived in the mail. It wasn't a letter, it was a legal notice, an eviction order filed by Eleanor and Marcus Vance. They had given him 30 days to vacate the premises. The cruelty was breathtaking in its efficiency. They hadn't even bothered to speak to him again. They had simply set their lawyers on him like dogs. That was the moment the fear shattered and gave way to a cold, hard anger. They were trying to take his home, the last piece of her he had left. They were trying to render him homeless and erase their history together. The injustice of it burned through the fog of his grief. His hand was steady as he walked to the mantelpiece. He took Sarah's letter, his thumb tracing the outline of the wax seal. He would not let them win. He would not let them be the final authors of Sarah's story. Whatever was in this letter, he would face it. For her, for them. He broke the seal. The sound was like a final deep exhalation. Inside there were 2 items, a single folded sheet of her familiar cream-coloured stationery and a small, ornate silver key. He unfolded the letter first, his heart pounding against his ribs. "My dearest Alex," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and 3 years have passed. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. I'm even more sorry for the secrets I had to keep." The words swam before his eyes. He had to sit down. He sank into his favourite armchair, the one opposite hers, and continued to read. "You know how much I despised my family's world," she wrote, "but what you don't know is why. It wasn't just the snobbery or the greed, it was the lie at the heart of it all. The Vance fortune, the one my mother and brother guard so jealously, is a pale shadow of what it once was. My grandfather was a visionary. My father was a fool who squandered it." Alex's breath hitched. This was not what he expected. "Years ago," the letter went on, "I saw the rot setting in. I saw my brother's reckless gambling on the market and my mother's desperate need to maintain appearances. I knew they would run it into the ground. So I started something of my own, in secret. I used a different name, built a new world from scratch, a world they could never touch or comprehend. I wanted to build something real, Alex, something that mattered. His mind struggled to keep up. Sarah, his quiet, book-loving Sarah, had built a secret world. The key in this envelope is for a safe deposit box at Sterling National Bank. The box contains a series of documents. They will lead you to a man named Mr. Arthur Davies of the law firm Davies & Finch. He is the only other person who knows the truth. He will explain everything. Trust him, my love. He will help you. The final paragraph was a devastating mix of love and warning. I know my family. After my death, their true nature will have revealed itself. They will be cruel to you. They will try to take everything. I set this 3-year timer because I knew you would need time to grieve, but I also knew their greed would eventually force your hand. This letter is not just a goodbye, Alex. It is a sword. What you find will give you the power to protect our life, our home, our memory. Use it. Be strong. I loved you more than anything. Forever yours, Sarah. Alex sat in the silent room, the letter trembling in his hand. A sword. She had left him a sword. The eviction notice on the table was no longer just an insult. It was a declaration of war. And Sarah, from 3 years in the past, had just handed him his weapon. He looked at the silver key glinting in the lamplight. The investigation had begun. The next morning, Alex walked into the downtown branch of Sterling National Bank. The building was an imposing marble edifice, a temple to wealth and power that made his skin crawl. It was the Vances' world, not his. But he clutched the silver key in his pocket, a talisman against the feeling that he didn't belong. He was led to the vault, a cavern of polished steel and hushed reverence. The attendant used a second key, and the small rectangular door swung open. Inside was a single, large leather-bound portfolio. It was heavy. Alex took it to a private viewing room, his hands shaking slightly as he laid it on the polished mahogany table. He untied the leather straps and opened it. The top document was a simple letter of introduction addressed to him from Arthur Davies. Beneath it were stacks of papers, incorporation documents for companies he'd never heard of, patent filings under a name that wasn't Sarah's, and financial statements that made his head spin. The numbers were staggering, filled with commas and zeros that seemed to stretch into infinity. He found one document that made him stop breathing. It was the deed to his house. It wasn't in Sarah's name or the Vance family's name. It was held by a corporation called Larkspur Holdings, LLC. According to the incorporation papers, the sole director of Larkspur Holdings was Sarah, under the pseudonym she had used. And according to a separate, notarized document, upon her death, sole ownership and directorship were to be transferred to him, Alexander Cole. He owned the house. He had owned it for 3 years. Eleanor and Marcus's eviction notice was a meaningless piece of paper. The audacity of their lie was stunning. They had tried to kick him out of his own home. He packed the portfolio and left the bank, his mind a whirlwind. He walked directly to the address Sarah had provided in her letter. Davies & Finch was located in a historic brownstone, its name etched in a discreet brass plaque by the door. It was the antithesis of the gaudy glass and steel towers where the Vance family did business. This place spoke of quiet, unshakable confidence. Mr. Arthur Davies was a man in his late 60s, with kind eyes, a sharp suit, and an air of profound competence. He greeted Alex not with surprise, but with a gentle, knowing smile, as if he had been expecting him for 3 years. "Mr. Cole," he said, shaking Alex's hand firmly, "please, come in. I have been holding Sarah's legacy for you." In his wood-panelled office, surrounded by leather-bound legal books, Mr. Davies laid out the full, unbelievable truth. The journey to the truth had led him here, to this quiet office where a secret empire was about to be unveiled. "Sarah was more than a genius, Mr. Cole," Davies began, his voice filled with respect. "She was a visionary. While her family was playing with inherited money, Sarah was building the future." He explained that Sarah, under the name Lena Sparrow, had founded a series of tech companies. One specialized in revolutionary data encryption, another in AI-driven logistics software. They were quiet, unglamorous, but incredibly profitable. She had built a multi-billion-dollar empire completely off the grid, invisible to the world, and especially to her family. She structured it all through a master trust, Davies explained, pointing to a complex diagram. A network of shell corporations and holding companies, all legally insulated from each other and from the Vance estate. She was the sole beneficiary, and now you are. The great revelation washed over Alex in a wave of shock and disbelief. He wasn't just a librarian, he was the heir to a fortune that dwarfed the Vance's wealth into insignificance. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country. But Davies wasn't finished. He slid one final file across the desk. "This," he said, his tone turning grim, "is the part Sarah hoped you would never have to use. It's why she called it a sword." The file contained a detailed analysis of Vance Sterling Investments, Eleanor, and Marcus's firm. It showed a company in a death spiral. Marcus had made a series of incredibly risky, leveraged bets, and they had all gone sour. The company was drowning in debt, staying afloat only by taking on increasingly predatory loans. "They are on the verge of total collapse," Davies said. "They are counting on one last big deal, a merger with a company called Aerodyne, to save them. Without it, they will be bankrupt within a month." Alex stared at him, confused. "What does this have to do with me?" Mr. Davies leaned forward, his expression intent. This was the moment of the ironic dependency, the final cruel twist of the knife Sarah had forged. Over the past few years, as their situation grew more desperate, they took on loans from a variety of private equity firms. What they don't know is that 3 of those firms are, in fact, shell corporations owned by Sarah's trust. "To put it simply, Mr. Cole," Davies said, the words landing with devastating weight, "Vance Sterling's largest creditor is you. You own their debt, and through another of Sarah's companies, you also happen to be the majority shareholder of Aerodyne, the very company they are trying to merge with." Alex felt the air leave his lungs. He didn't just have money, he had absolute power over the 2 people who had spent a decade trying to make him feel powerless. He held their entire world in the palm of his hand. He could crush them. The mechanism had been explained. The trap was set. All he had to do was spring it. While Alex was absorbing the scale of Sarah's secret legacy, Eleanor and Marcus Vance were celebrating. They sat in a ridiculously expensive restaurant, raising glasses of champagne. The eviction notice had been sent. In their minds, the final, irritating loose end of Sarah's life was about to be tied up. "He'll be gone in a month," Marcus said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Probably crawl back to whatever hovel he came from. Good riddance." "It's for the best," Eleanor agreed, dabbing her lips with a napkin. "The house can be sold. We need the liquidity, Marcus. The Aerodyne deal must go through." Her voice was tight with a stress she tried to conceal. "It will, Mother," Marcus reassured her, his confidence a hollow shell around a core of sheer panic. "I've staked everything on it. Once the merger is complete, our troubles are over. We'll be bigger than ever." They were so convinced of their own superiority, of Alex's weakness, that they never considered him a threat. He was a gnat to be swatted away. Their arrogance was a blindfold preventing them from seeing the abyss that was opening right under their feet. They were completely, blissfully unaware that the gnat they so despised was now the one holding the fly swatter. Their overconfidence was about to become their ruin. Back in Mr. Davies's office, the weight of the revelation settled upon Alex. It was a dizzying, terrifying power. For a moment he felt a flicker of hesitation. Could he really do it? Could he be the instrument of their destruction? Then he thought of Eleanor's sneer, of Marcus's condescending smirk. He thought of the check they tried to shove in his hand, a pittance meant to buy his dignity. He thought of the eviction notice, a cold, legalistic weapon aimed at his heart. He thought of 10 years of being treated like dirt beneath their polished shoes. Most of all, he thought of Sarah. She had seen this coming. She had endured their cruelty her whole life and had built this fortress not just for herself, but for him. She had given him a sword and trusted him to wield it. His grief, which had been a passive, sorrowful thing, began to change. It crystallized into a hard, sharp diamond of resolve. He looked at Mr. Davies, his eyes clear and steady for the first time in 3 years. This was his decision point. "They tried to kick me out of my own home," Alex said, his voice low and cold. "They tried to erase me. They underestimated Sarah, and they underestimated me. Let's begin." A slow, respectful smile spread across Mr. Davies's face. He slid a stack of documents across the desk. "These will transfer full executive authority of the trust and its assets to you. Once you sign, you will be in control." Alex picked up the pen. The weight of it felt immense. He signed his name on each page, his signature firm and unwavering. With each stroke, he felt less like a victim and more like a force of nature. He was no longer just Alex Cole, the grieving librarian. He was the executor of Sarah's will in every sense of the word. The strategy session that followed was methodical and precise. Mr. Davies, the competent facilitator, walked Alex through the plan they had formulated. It was not a chaotic revenge, but a surgical dismantling. The nature of the plan was elegant in its cruelty, using the very systems of finance and law that the Vances worshipped to bring about their downfall. "Step 1, Davies said, tapping a folder. "We call in their largest loans all at once. The loan agreements have clauses allowing for immediate recall under certain conditions, which their current financial instability already meets. They will have 72 hours to produce over $90 million. They cannot. Step 2, he continued, opening another file. The recall will trigger covenants in their other loan agreements, causing a cascade of defaults. Simultaneously, as the majority shareholder in Aerodyne, you will call an emergency board meeting and veto the merger. You don't even need to give a reason. Step 3, Davies concluded, is the checkmate. Sarah gathered extensive evidence of Marcus's financial malfeasance over the years, embezzlement from the company to cover personal gambling debts, fraudulent reporting to secure loans. We will submit this dossier to the district attorney. It's not just their company that will fall, it's them. Alex listened, a cold calm settling over him. It was devastating. It was total. It was exactly what they deserved. The initiation was as simple as a phone call. Alex gave the authorization. Mr. Davies nodded, picked up his phone, and spoke a few quiet, legally binding words to his team. The first domino had been pushed. The machine Sarah had built was now in motion, and it was unstoppable. The first email arrived in Marcus Vance's inbox at 9:02 a.m. It was from a holding company he barely recognized, an impersonal, automated notice. The subject line read, "Urgent Loan Recall Notification." He scoffed, assuming it was spam or some kind of error. He was about to delete it when a second one arrived, from a different firm, then a third. He stared at the screen, the color draining from his face. This wasn't an error. It was a coordinated attack. He frantically opened the attachments. They were all the same. Full, immediate repayment of all outstanding balances was demanded within 72 hours. The numbers were astronomical. It was a death sentence. The first domino had fallen, and its sound echoed through the sterile, glass-walled offices of Vance Sterling Investments. The reaction phase began. Marcus burst into Eleanor's office, his usual slick composure shattered. He was pale and sweating, holding his tablet like it was a venomous snake. "It's a disaster," he stammered. "They're calling everything in, all at once. We're ruined." Disbelief was Eleanor's first response. "That's impossible," she snapped. "Who is doing this? Call our bankers. Call our lawyers. Fix it." Her voice was a whip crack, the command of a woman who had never been told no. But for the first time, her commands were useless. Their bankers were suddenly unavailable. Their lawyers were confused, stating the recalls were legally airtight. They couldn't find out who owned the holding companies. The ownership was buried under layers of international privacy laws. They were fighting a ghost, a phantom enemy who knew their every weakness. Panic began to curdle into sheer terror. The cascade effect was swift and merciless. News of the loan recalls, expertly leaked by Mr. Davies's team, hit the financial newswires. The headline was brutal. Vance Sterling on brink of collapse. Their stock price, already fragile, plummeted into oblivion. Clients, smelling blood in the water, began to panic, pulling their investments in a frantic exodus. Then came the second blow. An official press release from Aerodyne hit the market. The highly anticipated merger with Vance Sterling had been cancelled, effective immediately, following a decision by its majority shareholder. No further explanation was given. That was the shot that killed the company. The hope they had clung to was extinguished. The phones rang off the hook with angry investors and probing journalists. The empire was crumbling, and it was happening in a matter of hours. From his quiet bungalow, Alex observed the collapse. Mr. Davies provided him with real-time updates. He watched the Vance Sterling stock ticker on his computer screen, a flat line at the bottom of the graph. He read the scathing news articles detailing the firm's spectacular implosion. He felt a strange, detached sense of vindication. It wasn't joy. It was the cold, clean feeling of a great weight being lifted, of a cosmic imbalance being righted. He was a spectator to a demolition he had ordered. A few days later, he saw Eleanor at the local grocery store. She looked like a different person. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her face pale and drawn. She was arguing with the cashier over the price of organic kale, her voice shrill and desperate. She didn't even notice him as he walked past, pushing his cart. He felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a profound understanding of how fragile their world had always been. It was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide had finally come in. His facade of ignorance was perfect, a final layer of dramatic irony in their downfall. The ruin was absolute. Their corporate accounts were frozen. Their personal assets, which had been leveraged as collateral for the business loans, were seized. The Vance mansion, with its cold marble floors and pretentious art, was foreclosed upon. They lost everything. The cars, the country club memberships, the respect of their peers, it all evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Finally, inevitably, they came to him. They arrived at his doorstep one evening, not in a chauffeured town car, but in a dented, decade-old sedan that Marcus had probably borrowed. They looked haggard, defeated. All the arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only raw, impotent rage. This was the final confrontation, the reckoning, held in the very home they had tried to steal. They didn't knock. Marcus slammed his palm against the door. Alex opened it and looked at them, his expression calm, neutral. "You," Eleanor hissed, her voice a venomous rasp. "This was you. It has to be." "I don't know what you're talking about," Alex said, his voice even. He decided to let them unravel first. "Don't play dumb with us," Marcus shouted, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Our whole world has been destroyed by some phantom corporation. First the loans, then the Aerodyne deal. It's too much of a coincidence that it all happened after we tried to get rid of you. You did this somehow, you worthless little parasite." They pushed their way inside, their desperation making them bold. They stood in the middle of the living room, a space filled with memories they had tried to desecrate. Alex simply closed the door and turned to face them. He let the silence stretch, letting their accusations hang in the air until they became absurd. Then he began to speak. The protagonist's monologue, the reveal of all, had finally arrived. "You spent 10 years treating me like I was nothing," he began, his voice quiet but carrying an immense weight. "You saw me as a stain on your family's pristine reputation. You whispered behind my back at dinners. You patronized me. You insulted my life, my work. You thought I was weak." He took a step forward. "After Sarah died, you saw your chance to finally wipe the slate clean. You treated her memory like a corporate asset to be liquidated. You tried to throw me out of our home with a check for $50,000 like you were tossing scraps to a dog." Eleanor and Marcus just stared, their anger momentarily replaced by confusion. "But what you didn't know," Alex continued, his voice hardening, "was that Sarah saw you. She saw you more clearly than anyone. She knew your greed, your cruelty, your incompetence. She knew you would run the family name into the ground, and she prepared for it." He let that sink in. "You thought you lived in a palace while I lived in a cottage. The truth is, your palace was a house of cards, and you were living on borrowed time. Sarah didn't just leave your world, she built a new one, an empire so vast and so secret you couldn't even comprehend its existence." He walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the framed photo of Sarah. "The holding companies that called in your loans, they were hers. The majority shareholder of Aerodyne who cancelled your precious merger, that was her. And now, it's me." The truth hit them like a physical blow. Eleanor staggered back, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus's face went from red rage to a ghastly, waxy white.
"No," Eleanor whispered. "No, it's not possible." "Oh, it's very possible," Alex said, his tone devoid of any emotion but a cold finality. "She left everything to me. This house you tried to evict me from, I've owned it for 3 years. The debt that just crushed your company, I own that too. Every penny of the failure that now defines your lives, you owe to me." The antagonist breakdown was spectacular. Eleanor let out a scream, a raw, guttural sound of pure, shattered disbelief. It was the sound of a queen realizing her throne was made of dust. "You lie, you little worm! We'll sue you! We'll destroy you!" she shrieked, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into insanity.
"You can't," Alex said calmly, "because Sarah also left me this." He gestured to a leather portfolio on the coffee table, the one Mr. Davies had prepared. "It's a complete record of your financial crimes, Marcus. The money you embezzled to pay off your bookies, the fraudulent reports you filed, a copy has already been delivered to the district attorney's office. You aren't just bankrupt, you're criminals." That was the final act. Marcus looked utterly broken, his body seeming to shrink in on itself. All the fight went out of him, replaced by a hollow, abject despair. Eleanor continued to scream threats and insults, but they were meaningless, the ravings of a broken mind. "Now," Alex said, his voice like ice, "get out of my house." He opened the front door and stood there, waiting. They stumbled out into the night, two ruined people cast out into a world that no longer wanted them. He closed the door, and the silence that returned to the house was no longer heavy with grief. It was clean, it was peaceful, it was the silence of justice. The epilogue of the Vance family was swift and brutal. The DA's office moved quickly. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Marcus pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Eleanor, implicated in the cover-up, received a lesser sentence of 3 years, but her public humiliation was absolute. Their names became a cautionary tale among the city's elite, a story of hubris and a spectacular fall from grace. They were left with nothing, no money, no status, no legacy. Their punishment was complete. Alex, in contrast, embraced his new reality with quiet purpose. His protagonist's reward was not a life of idle luxury. He had no interest in yachts or mansions. Instead, he honored Sarah's true spirit. He worked with Mr. Davies to establish the Sarah Vance Foundation for Young Innovators, a massive charitable trust dedicated to funding the brilliant, overlooked minds of the world, the kinds of people Sarah had been and the kinds of people her family would have dismissed. He sold off the more aggressive and morally ambiguous parts of Sarah's portfolio, reinvesting the capital into green energy, medical research, and education. He used the immense power she had given him not for revenge, but for renewal. He was proving, day by day, his inherent goodness. A year after the confrontation, the victory lap took place. Alex stood on a stage at the dedication ceremony for the Foundation's first major project, a state-of-the-art tech incubator built in a low-income neighborhood. He was dressed in a simple, well-made suit, looking not like a billionaire, but like the calm, thoughtful man he had always been. He spoke to the crowd not of money or power, but of potential, of dreams, and of the woman whose vision had made it all possible. He was at peace, his purpose clear. After the ceremony, he was approached by a woman. Her name was Clara, the lead architect for the building. She had warm, intelligent eyes and a kind smile. She didn't talk to him about his wealth. She talked to him about the building's design, about how the flow of natural light could inspire creativity. Their conversation was easy, natural. For the first time in years, Alex felt a connection that wasn't tied to his past, but pointed toward a possible future. It was not a grand, dramatic romance, but the quiet, promising start of a new, healthy relationship with a respectful partner. It was his moral reward, a symbol of his new life. Later that evening, he stood on the balcony of the new building, looking out over the city lights. He thought about the journey, the pain, the anger, and the final quiet victory. He had not sought this power, but he had wielded it justly. He had honored the woman he loved and had brought down the cruel people who had tried to diminish her light. The closing moral of his story was now clear to him. True power lies not in what we display to the world, not in the names we carry or the accounts we possess. It lies in our character, in our integrity, and in the love we build. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the positive legacy we leave behind. The arrogant and the cruel may build their empires high, but they are always building them on sand, waiting for a tide of truth to wash them all away.